Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for being with us, in spite of the fact that it's time to have an evening drink. So this panel is devoted to a subject which, according to some economists, should become the obsession of our public policies. The situation of NEETs in France. The NEETs are young people between the age of 15 and 29, neither in employment, education, or training. My name is Friederike HOFMANN. I'm a correspondent for the German public television, ARD, in France, and I've been covering French politics for 5 years, and I hear about elderly people, retirement, employing older people, but we hear a lot less about young people. And yet 1.4 million young people in France are without employment, education, or training. That's quite striking, and beyond the individual prospects, this creates a structural problem for the future, and it's an incredible cost for our society. How can we better support these young people in a context where things are changing very quickly from an economic point of view, where there's an awful lot of divides and unemployment? Nathalie CHUSSEAU, you are an economist and a professor at the University of Lille. You're vice president of the Scientific Council. You work for the Cercle de l'économistes, and you are the coordinator. So then we have HEDON, a defender of rights, a former journalist, Laurent FREIXE, PDG of Nestlé, LABAYE, president of the consultancy IDEL Partners, president of the Monetary Committee, and former president of the École Polytechnique, and Mamphela, RAMPHELE, an activist and honorary president of the think tank, the Rome Club. So we're opening our panel with Nathalie CHUSSEAU. Nathalie, as an economist, you've worked a lot on the question of NEETs, and underlying that acronym, there are some very diverse realities. There are young graduates who are moving on. There are those who have family responsibilities. But among these profiles, it's the dropouts that you are most worried about. Why is that? Thank you very much. Yes, effectively, who are we talking about? And how many of them are there? They are 15 to 29-year-olds who are neither in employment, education, or training. Just to give you an idea, at the end of 2024, the figure corresponded to 12.8%, which is much higher than the European average, 1.5% above the European average, representing 1.4 million young people. Now, that's over 1 young person out of 8, and 29% in priority districts of cities. Now, effectively, the real subject here is, among these NEETs, we have young people, Friederike, who I'm not worried about because they have just graduated, so they're looking for jobs. So that's 16%. That we've got those looking for an ideal job. I'm not worried about those. And then there are others who want to go around the world or work for an NGO. So the subject, that's not where the real subject lies. The real subject lies among the dropouts, young people who leave the educational system, the initial educational system, without having any diplomas, without having any form of qualification that might be the equivalent of a high school leaving certificate or a professional diploma. So just to give you an idea, the flow of these dropouts represents 80,000 young people a year. So it's between 80,000 and 90,000. Now, among these, that represents 60,000 people under the age of 18. And of course, as an economist, what I'm interested in is the flow, but also the stock. When we do the calculation, we reach 1 million of dropouts, 160,000 up to the age of 25, and the rest between 25 and 29. If I look at the figures, 29% of these NEETs have no diploma, and 26% have either a technical diploma or a professional diploma. Now, how can we explain this substantial number? The first point is that social origin plays a role here. 43% of the NEETs have a worker for a father, and 12% have an employee for a father. Now, I'm not surprised by those figures. You know that France is one of the OECD countries where social origins are important for school results, and they explain 20% of the results of our 15-year-olds. So the school is reproducing inequalities. Now, we can look at the French map of schools and public mid-schools and look at their social position, an indicator that represents the social situation of pupils faced with training. What do we see? We see that people from low-income families are all in the same public schools. It's especially true for mid-schools. And inside the the poorest districts. Now, the absence of social mixity doesn't allow to make any corrections to this situation. But all that doesn't matter, some people say. But young people are the future of our country. Secondly, that costs 22 billion euros. And if we add the fact that, if we integrated these needs socially and economically, that would have produced a gain of 0.04% in terms of growth. So what should we do? Well, we've set up a certain number of systems, public schemes. First of all, we've made progress. We need to point that out. There's an obligation for training between 16 and 18. So we've got a better way of identifying the dropouts. And there's a reporting obligation. Those who run these public schools have to report who drops out. So we're also promoting apprenticeship. We have apprentices, but most of these apprentices have already been through higher education, so they're not dropouts. We've also set up another scheme called the Young Recruitment Contract, which is run by the employment agency, and we have agencies like IDEL, so to help young people to be socially inserted, and then there are production schools that are interested in support and insertion of these young dropouts. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to do three things. First of all, we've got to start by reducing social determinism at school level in order to encourage access to the qualification of young people from underprivileged backgrounds. We've also got to continue to develop schools, second chance schools, production schools, and especially in France, in areas where the number of NEETs is very high. I told you about the fact that we had 29%, but if you look at certain rural areas in the Hauts-de-France, there are areas where you have between 30 to 40% of NEETs, which is really very high. And then one last thing, we need to strengthen partnerships with local companies, especially to meet the needs of sectors under pressure, whether we're talking about production schools or EP. This is something that works. Thank you, Nathalie. Now, Mrs. HEDON, as a defender of rights, you are especially engaged in questions of equality. Now, the figures, we heard the figures from Nathalie. What do they say about the reality of equal opportunities in France? Well, yes, I'm going to focus on why do they become NEETs and what should we prevent them, what should do to prevent them from becoming NEETs. Now, so we're talking about all skills, public services when they ask for benefits or when they're in difficulty from the point of view of their schools. You said that 60,000 of these NEETs were under the age of 18, so these are things that we can work on. We are an external control body for defending rights. We look at who is confronted with the law and order because they've been demonstrating. We act as a warning system. So few young people know that we exist. So an important point is to go out to meet them, to find out what their difficulties are. For example, you talked about local missions. We have local area representatives who are present in the local mission organizations. Now, the institution has 260 agents, so mainly legal experts. They deal with claims. But we have 600 and odd delegates who are volunteers who deal with quite a lot of the applications. Now, because, you know, people have difficulty accessing rights, but we don't see that in the claims. The defense of rights is part of the Constitution, and that's because of the reform in 2008 and 2011 that defines our missions, our skills, and our authority. So what we have to do is protect rights. So this involves protecting skills and the acquisition of skills, but not just for individuals. We have to make sure that rights are also respected. So there are two examples that show how we work with NEETs. So there are secondary school students, for example, who don't have a secondary school. We were told in the 2018 about children who didn't have a secondary school. So we went out, we did a survey. We were created alongside justice. So we are not allowed to impose anything, but we can do a lot of surveys. So how many young people admitted to the A levels are affected by this process? In fact, national education had never put together the figures at national level. We're talking about 18,000 young people in 2022, 22,000 in 2023. We're continuing the survey, and we're going to be asking to continue it next year, and 26,500 in 2024. So at the end of October, they all have a school to go to. But can you imagine? They're allowed to go to A levels, but they can't go to school. Symbolically, that's really quite terrible, and that tells you where my role is in society. So it tells us about needs. If you've missed 2 weeks, a month of schooling, and you can't catch up on the lessons, well, you know, we've produced some recommendations. One was to take on board the young person, even in their mid-school. That's something that was applied. We asked the FLNet to do something, to do some rounds. The next one will be at the end of August. So there are still young people who don't know which school they were going to until the 2nd, 3rd of September. So we can do a lot of surveys, but we can't impose anything. We're just trying to convince the minister, so the Minister of Education. Now, the other job that we have done concerns careers guidance, because there are young people who we meet and we're struck by the difficulties linked to careers guidance. And that's quite striking. Let me just give you a quick summary. I said I only had 5 minutes, but you know, too many pupils you know, are subjected to their guidance, whereas it's part of education laws, but rights are not very well known or guaranteed. So it's important to make sure that guidance is a driver of emancipation. These inequalities are social, but they're also land or territorial. And this is something that we're seeing, the same as you. There are big difficulties in rural areas and in underprivileged areas. And what's quite impressive, well, when we started to look at the problem, the responsibility is shared between the state and the region. A psychologist working for national education for 1,200 pupils, that's obviously not enough. You'd need to have more than that. And we're also seeing the question of the central role of internships when children are 13 and 14, 15. Parents often don't have a network to help with that. And then there are councils, juries that are biased. So we've drawn up a number of recommendations. So we need to have a careers guidance counsellor. It's part of the law, but a lot of things are not being done. So, and then there's also the responsibility of the schools themselves when it comes to internships. The obligations shouldn't just rest on the shoulders of the young person, but also on the school. So there are different ways to address these questions by doing surveys and drawing up reports.
Laurent FREIXE, you are the CEO of Nestlé. You've launched many initiatives geared towards the employment of young people at a European level and at a global level. How Nestlé as a company can better contribute to the integration of needs, young people without any skills. I'm delighted to be part of this discussion panel. The company is part of a solution. What are we talking about? Education for employment and youth employment for those who are outside the system. Allow me to highlight a point that hasn't been yet underscored. It's a global phenomenon everywhere in the world. Lots of countries are faced with those young people who are dropouts, who are left out. And an integrated young person can contribute to the community from an economic viewpoint, from a social viewpoint. This is something that we tend to forget. We've been talking about education, employment, and the corporate world should provide some solutions. So during the crisis in Europe, we drew the lessons from what happened. There were many young people outside the system. It was a genuine issue in a context whereby Europe is aging and Europe has to integrate young people. Otherwise, this is a time bomb, and a time bomb that might explode very shortly, especially if you look at the dire situation in some neighborhoods and districts. So maybe it has to do with the Swiss dimension of Nestlé, but the companies have a role to play regarding the educational models. We believe in apprenticeship. So 2/3 of Swiss students go through an apprenticeship training program. It's a career path of choice, and the employment rate in the end is 100% for these people. We think that this model is relevant at a global level, so this model should enable young people to be integrated into the system. They should be given training and practical experience. Why apprenticeship is the right model, the right scheme? Because this model combines theory and practice. So in terms of apprenticeship, in terms of learning, there's no better way to combine theory and practice. So we launched this initiative 12 years ago. We focused on the employability of young people to boost and foster the apprenticeship model, to give opportunities for young people, internships. They are lacking some professional experience, even though they graduate from a high school. They need to follow some internships in order to get a job. Moreover, we decided to stress two major issues: entrepreneurship, to help young people to develop their entrepreneurship skills, creation of value, creation of opportunities, and the third topic that is connected with our business activities, to help young people to be entrepreneurs in the farming sector, in the agricultural sector, not only in France and in Europe. You have to know that less than 7% of farmers are under 35 years of age, and the average age is about 60. So there's an issue, there are some needs, there are some requirements. It's important to help, to support, to give guidance to these young people so that they can be integrated into the farming sector. This is a major avenue for Nestlé, and this sector has to renew itself with regenerative practices. We need to develop new skills. So this has to do with apprenticeship. There's a paradoxical situation. We have lots of young people without any jobs. You have jobless people, and at the same time, the companies are complaining about not being able to find the skills. So it's important to get an apprenticeship system. An apprenticeship system is part of a solution. When we launched this initiative, we said that we may have an impact, even though it's a drop in the ocean. Let us work with the value chain. Let us work with our partners in order to have a multiplying effect. The Alliance for Youth that we launched 10 years ago in France, and the impact is visible. 10 million young people have been integrated in one way or another, and they managed to get access to economic and social opportunities. The two are intertwined, and our commitment is continuing. Very shortly, we will make an announcement. This initiative will be expanded, and this is a daunting issue. By way of anecdote, China has stopped communicating the rate of unemployment for young people, 20%. So China doesn't communicate anymore about unemployment rate because the figure was 20%. Thank you. So, Mr. LABAYE, you were the president of Polytechnic School, the co-founder of Génération France. In order to boost access to employment in France, there are lots of initiatives designed to improve the situation. But what are the key success factors if you want an initiative to be successful and fruitful? Hello, everyone. Allow me to share the lessons from Generation. Generation is a non-profit making organization, and I've been working with them for the past 10 years, and we launched it 10 years ago. And I was with McKinsey at the time. At global level, we looked at education for employment. And as you pointed out, in all the countries in the world, we are faced with the same issue. We are working with decision makers to improve the facilities, but we need to be on the field. We need to walk the talk in order to improve things. Hence the creation of this generation with lots of philanthropists. And our mission is to enable young people, whatever his or her background, to get back to work. And there's a second element, the FLASH method, a rigorous methodology, and we monitor our performances. We design those training programs, and we have to make sure that young people are integrated into a training program. A few elements regarding the methodology. I will be sharing the results with you. The results were quite good in France and globally. We are in 17 countries. In the United States, Spain, Italy, UK, Ireland, Africa, Ghana, Kenya, we're in Asia, India, Thailand, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Australia, amongst others. And what is the method all about? Very simple, but very rigorous, something that we've highlighted. We need to identify these skills. We need to work with the companies in the field, in a given region, in a city. What are the needs? What are the skills? Second element, there shouldn't be any prerequisites in terms of recruitment. There are some interviews, of course, there are tests, but there is no prerequisites in terms of diploma or degrees. It's a matter of motivation, tests on basic skills, intrinsic skills that will enable you to follow a training program. Third element, to develop short-term training programs, immersive, intensive, from 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 types of skills. You have technical skills, soft skills. You need to be able to talk to a customer, but they're mindset skills. So basically, to take into account the midterm. What we want to make sure is to foster a career. So each of the learner can cast a future-oriented eye. I will be able to learn all my life. So what is important is to have a mindset-oriented skill. So we are talking about assistants, customer relationship managers, jobs in the green tech, repairers of bicycles, installers of photovoltaic panels, solar panels. So in 3 weeks, in 3 months, you can train all these people with all the skills. The fourth element, during the training program, it's important to work with the companies and with the young learners to undergo interviews. And for companies, I will welcome people with atypical profiles. How companies can screen people with a different profile. So field work is being done during the training program, and there's a key success factor, mentoring. We have a mentoring process 6 months after taking up a position, and there will be a whole community that will help the learners during the whole training program. Last but one element, we need to think about the midterm horizon. So to get a sustainable job, not just a first job, a career, an employment, a job rather. So when we look at the learners who have found a job, they will get a sustainable job, economic security, and of course they will enjoy their job. 87% of young people have said that I'm very enthusiastic about my job, I'm very happy with the job that I've got. So work and employment enables them to be confident again. It's important to monitor performances, insertion rate, integration rate. So the program was created in 2014, 17 countries, 130,000 young people who've undergone this training program. The 3-month integration rate is 60%, 6 months 90%, and 5 years 75%. So for those who have followed the 5-year training program, they've been promoted. So what is important is to fine-tune the programs to pay attention to what the learners tell us, the satisfaction rate, and the last element in terms of monitoring the cost. So 3,000 young people over the past 3 years, 650 employers who are working with us, and the cost is about 3,000 euros, a 3-week training program, a 3-month training program, 3,000 euros in terms of cost, and for the society, for the state, 6,000 euros in terms of savings. So public sector will invest to the tune of 95%. You have philanthropists who will help us, and for the state can save 6,000 euros. There's a multiplying effect. Young people have been able to find a job again. Young people can enjoy economic stability and well-being at work, and for society as a whole, it's a positive economic benefit, in addition to the human and humane benefit. By way of conclusion, there are resources, there are methods whereby it's possible to integrate people, to give opportunities, and of course we need to go on along this path, and we need to expand to other countries so that people can find a job again. Thanks a lot.
Mrs. Ramphele, the NEETs phenomenon is not just a French phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon. What does it tell us about the way our societies work? And I'm sorry, she took the microphone away from her mouth. I didn't hear the last question.
Thank you very much for including me in this panel. I agree with everything that my co-panelists have said. But it begs the question, what's the cause? What's the root cause? Why is this NEET phenomenon a global phenomenon? From my health perspective, you cannot actually do justice by treating someone with a problem without understanding the source of the problem. And I believe that what the NEETs phenomenon, which is a global phenomenon, is doing is to hold a mirror to the face of the world, that our socio-economic and political systems are not fit for purpose for the 21st century. They are based on a post-industrial revolution model, which was about extraction. It was about winner takes all. It was about linear thinking. It was about me, myself, and I. So young people fall off this bus because the bus is not designed to have everybody in it. So all of what my colleagues have said is valuable in the interim. But what do we do in the long term? I come from a country, South Africa, which is only 30 years old, but we have 37 to 40% of young people who have fallen off the bus. And so my first point to make in terms of action is, let's change the narrative It's not a narrative about inserting young people into a system that's failing. The narrative should be about, whilst we are dealing with the short-term help for individual students, what do we do to stop the system from malfunctioning? What kind of reimagination of the system do we need? And a key part of the system is the education system. There was talk about mindset change, but the educational systems we have across the globe are based on the educational philosophy of exactly what I've talked about, the extractive linear thinking. So if we want to stop the phenomenon of needs becoming part and parcel of the reality of the world, which is in polycrisis anyway, we have to go to the source. And education is an entry point that should help all of us to do the work that needs to be done to help young people, not to be helped when they've fallen out of school or dropped out, but to get the kind of education that, first of all, affirms them as people. Not the narrative that they come from underprivileged or poor circumstances. They're not underprivileged. It's the system that creates privilege and underprivilege. And if we don't move away from that narrative of underprivilege, we will be talking about insertion. It's not as if young people are sitting out there and dying to be part of a system that has failed them. There are surveys that have been done, for example, across the world about what young people think. And they fundamentally, more than 60% of them said that what is needed is a change in the political and socio-economic system to transform it into one that affirms our interconnectedness and interdependence. So I believe we need to get to the root cause.
Merci beaucoup. Madame Hédon, le facteur... Vous avez déjà parlé de ça dans votre introduction.
You already talked about the educational factor in your introduction, Mrs. HEDON, but how can we change the school system in France to create more equality? I find what has been said very interesting. It's a failure of our society, or societies in the plural. We're not the only country facing this problem. We're not very good at things, though, because in these other studies, our school system is good at working with an elite, but not with everybody, all classes. So how do you fight against that? And that's, you know, it's all about succeeding at school. And there are other things too. Housing conditions, the working conditions of parents, everything's very much interlinked. You've got to be in the right conditions for learning. If you're in a small space, for example, what support is provided by schools? What about a mixity as well? Diversity, this is another question that has to do with succeeding at school. So there are lots of different questions, but this is telling us something, and I think you've all underlined this, the way we can leave on the side of the road a part of our society, which is terrible when it's young people, because we can do things, we can implement actions. I think, you know, we've got to tell ourselves this. If we fight against the idea of having young people who are without training and without employment, yes, that comes at a cost for society, but these young people are a cost in themselves, so that's not what I mean. We've got to work on the long term as well, on school success. And the right to education is part of all of our democracies. What we're seeing, so children drop out of school, but the right to education is still not a complete reality. Nathalie, you said that territorial inequality plays a crucial role when it comes to training the elite. In your opinion, what can be done to improve the situation? Well, first of all, I completely agree with what's just been said. For me, the first thing is to act on school success. Our educational system It doesn't teach absolutely essential knowledge for succeeding at school, and only only the children of professors, the children of elite manage that success. We consider as equal in the eyes of the law children who are not equal simply because they're not prepared by their family culture to assimilate an educational message. So we haven't changed that at all. It's even worse. The situation has become worse. The second thing is that, well, there's social diversity is important at school, fewer pupils in classrooms, but we need to have policies for supporting children, especially those who come from low-income families, and where there are lots of children. There are priority districts, but there are also rural areas where there are people who are very much enclaved and hemmed in, and that's where we need to really focus. Those areas need to be targeted, and when we can't manage, we need to invest massively in production schools, in second chance schools, to pick up these dropouts as quickly as possible. And we need to work with companies as well. I'd just like to come back to something. In the examples that we saw, the examples of our school children without secondary schools, some are sent to schools an hour away from their home. Can you imagine? You're not in the best conditions if you have to travel an hour to school every day, and that's something that has to be thought about as well. Yes, we live in a world where there's a shortage of labor, so that might be something good for inserting NEETs. So another concern is those with who come from low-income families. The techniques are, well, technical jobs are not necessarily low-income jobs. I think the problem is, what is the educational model? Is it to make sure that 80% of a certain generation does A-levels, or is it to find a balance between those who want to become doctors, those who want to become lawyers and engineers, and then train enough plumbers and farmers and others? So that's where it all starts. So the success model is the university-based model. And I'd like to come back to the Swiss example. We were talking about the German example. Two economies that are doing well with low unemployment rates, that are focusing on the insertion of young people or the insertion of NEETs, but who are also promoting technical training. In Switzerland, the path that leads to university concerns 40% maximum young people. And there's a bridge at the end of an apprenticeship to university. Can you please put the microphone in front of your mouth, please? And that means that, well, let me come back to something. First of all, it means that the load is shared between the public authorities and companies who cover part of the costs, but it means that we can train young people for jobs that the companies need. So they train the pupils to work on jobs that they need. And that's what guarantees success. So finding a balance between those who go to university, and we need young engineers, lawyers, and doctors, and those who follow more technical training, by making sure that they know that they're important as well for our social fabric and for social and economic development. This is something that seems absolutely critical, and companies need to be convinced that they have to take part. We did our calculations in terms of investment, the investment required for the development of young people. And what is the return on investment for Nestlé? Now, our calculations say that €1 invested brings in 1.5, 1.6 according to the calculation for Nestlé. So the return on investment is great. So it's 1 to 5, the ratio, in terms of developing human capital, economic and social development, and integration and stability in terms of the social fabric. Mr. LABAYE, the French education system is often said to be elitist. You are president of one of the best schools. In your opinion, how can we bring the academic elite closer with concrete realities? So I'll talk about the initiatives that we have in our school. And I'd like to follow on from what my neighbour said with respect to the link between companies. This is a characteristic of the German-Swiss system. So companies and schools. It's important to have role models, and it's important to show young people how they can fulfill their aspirations. And this is an important element. So we went to see young people of the age of 15 and 16 when they're young people start to think about their future. We went to see them to show everything that's possible in terms of aspirations, scientific careers, other careers. But, you know, you can have aspirations and the world is, you know, your oyster. You know, some people question internships. So this link with alumni is also important. We didn't do this in the center of Paris either. We did it in rural areas, in priority districts, etc. So I think, you know, showing young people that there are possibilities. We often realize that, you know, they don't understand what is possible, what the potential is. So that there's a responsibility there. Perhaps young students from elite schools should go out and inspire others and tell them that lots of things are possible. It's not, you know, when you're 13 and 14, you don't know what's out there. You know, the family can show you part of the opportunities, but, you know, we need to have more of a wide-angle lens. So we are in contact with companies. Well, no. In France, the contact with companies comes a lot later, whereas in Switzerland, it's as of the age of 10. So we've got to open young people up to the socio-economic world as early as possible so that they can fulfill their aspirations. Thank you. Let's talk about inspiration. There's a sentence that marked me. We don't need charity, but we need real change. We don't. How, according to you, can we give back hope to young people in our societies?
I want to take the conversation global because I come from Africa, and when we talk about the family background, we could as well talk about the country background. And there is a tendency in global fora to think about what we call at the Club of Rome most of the world as places where you send development aid. It's actually not true. The figures that have been crunched by economists show us that in fact there is a net flow of resources from the poorest parts of the world to Western countries. Second, there is a tendency whether it's investments or loans are made, that countries, which are most of the world, are charged exorbitant interest rates. 500 times what you would pay for a loan in Europe, you pay if you are in Africa or Asia. And the idea is it's a measure of the risk. But who? Risk perceived by who? Because the perceiver looks at Africa and Asia and other places as high-risk areas, poor countries that are unlikely to return the investment. And we have just heard figures about the return on investment. Actually, if one were to do the return on investment in those countries if they are unburdened from the debts and other things that impact the quality of education young people get from most of the world, the quality of healthcare that people get in those areas, and therefore the quality of jobs and other basic human rights that people have. I want to appeal to my fellow panelists and to all of you here in the audience. We need a reset of the global system. This system is based on privilege, on elitism. It cannot sustain an ever-growing global population. We see wars and conflicts in my continent and also now in Europe and other places, and those wars and conflicts are all about resources, the extraction of resources, and the understanding of power as power over rather than power to enable people to do what needs to be done. Because the essence of being human is to be connected to others, to be interdependent. But also as a human race, we have introduced these ideas that because someone has got a different complexion, has got a different set of hair, therefore they are different. Diversity is not about that. We are one human race. Yes, we express our cultures differently, and that enriches us. It's not a problem. It is an enrichment. But we need to infuse that mindset, that philosophical orientation in our education systems, from preschool all the way to universities. And then we can build a world that doesn't leave people behind. That the term NEETs is actually it's a curse upon a world that is leaving its own children behind. And we need to do better. And we have the resources to do better.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions du public? Oui, nous avons des microphones.
Questions from the audience? Yes, we have some roving mics, I think. You, Mr. in the front row, go ahead. Thanks a lot. A question to the Ombudsman. You've talked about disabilities that could be a barrier for the NEETs, and there are some systemic barriers that prevent them from getting access to jobs and employment. Have you formulated some recommendations? Yes, over the past few weeks we've been impressed. Parents of young people turned to us. They had an adaptation system to disability, more time, the possibility for these young people to use a computer. And during the exams, the young disabled people couldn't use a computer, for example. And there was a pretext. They said the young person is successful because he succeeds because he has a computer, not vice versa. So from time to time we are told the young disabled person will get a benefit, will get an advantage. So this is something that we've seen. What is important is to give some information to universities. What is important is adaptation to disabled people. The issue of disability is the first factor of discrimination in employment. You have people who are on a long sick leave or they are in a disability situation, and the workstation is not adapted in the corporate world. And public authorities can help, can support. What does it mean, reasonable adaptation? We have in mind a physical disability, which means wide doors, but what is important is to adapt work time. If the companies have done whatever it takes, I wouldn't have seen those problems. And basically, people will be urged to resign. Young people, disabled people will be urged to resign. So it's a huge loss for these people and for society. What can businesses do? A good practice could be to focus on one type of disability. Basically, you can adapt the workstation, the work environment. Have an example of a plant where people are focused on auditorily challenged people, deaf people. So management learned sign language, and there was mutual support amongst the teams, and you can be connected to the educational system. You can create a kind of cluster that can work well. So we have some companies with people who are deaf. So this is almost the end of the discussion. So Nathalie, can you summarize the discussion? I will provide you with a quick summary. So what are the lessons? I mean, the NEETs. This is a global phenomenon. We are not good, but this is a global phenomenon. Businesses have a key role to play in terms of education when it comes to implementing technical schemes that have been beefed up and adapted to the needs. I infer that we know how to do it. There's a return on investment, so we will be more optimistic. And of course, what's at stake here? The role model, this is something that is important to open the field of what is possible. Young people didn't realize how capable they are, that they have some skills, to give trust to them. This should be an obligation of the major or French schools or French higher education establishment. A global reset to reform the educational system. We are in a global system that does not cooperate and which is non-inclusive within the countries and across the countries. And you're right, between the countries of the West and the countries of the South. And I can tell you that we still have some work to do. And of course, people shouldn't hesitate to turn to the defender of rights, to the ombudsman. Thanks a lot to all of you, and thanks a lot. Have a nice evening. Enjoy your evening. Thank you.